So let's say 60 seconds for an answer. Is that okay, Andrian?
Perfectly fine.
Who wants to start?
You already told the audience what we're doing because you barely told us, but okay.
What do you think we are going to do?
I'm really not certain,
Okay.
but I'm fine. I'm fine with it, whatever.
David, first question. If Europe, imagine Europe would be a traded stock.
Me?
Imagine
yeah.
Europe would be a traded stock.
Right.
Would you buy it? And if not, why wouldn't you?
Well, I would buy it. I mean, I'm such a fundamental optimist that I still see enormous potential for pretty much every region on the planet, to be honest. And I can say a few things, right? Like,
Sure.
do I want time it? Okay. I mean, Europe obviously is in the throes of challenge right now, just as every part. Really, it's a weird time. Let's admit that. But even the fact that somebody like him could exist gives me optimism for Europe. He was just telling me about his job. I mean, he's basically responsible for, among other, philosophy in his newspaper. I mean, you Germans are so goddamn cultured compared to us, you know, that really we ought to be glad you exist. And I think that the culture that you represent and that so many other European nations cultivate to an extent that we don't even understand, we don't even know how to think in those terms. Civilization matters, and you've taken it to a relatively higher level, I think, overall. I'm not kidding. I think we're a very crude country. I do. So I'm generally optimistic about Europe. And I think that I know there's Germans in the room who are very negative about Merkel, but I think the fact that you've taken those refugees is an astonishing statement of humanity that is a wonderful beacon for the rest of mankind. So good for you.
You want to answer Andrian or Andrew first? Andrian. Is it true that you're thinking about philosophy the whole day while doing the newspaper?
Yeah, that's what I do.
not what I
Basically, they all think I'm like really producing a newspaper in pages. So all I'm thinking is like,
Heidegger.
what is the worth of my existence? Why do, stuff like that.
So would you buy a stock?
I would definitely buy. You sold me on that stock, definitely, and I think I would buy it. It would probably also be at a low point in price right now. Yeah. So it would be a really good time to get in. But as a long-term investment, I would definitely buy it because I mean, every company, if you look at it, company is looking for values, purpose, meaning, and that's definitely something that would come out of Europe and could be injected.
I mean, if you're talking about the EU, it's another matter. But Europe as a concept is something I remain optimistic about.
They're working on it in Brussels.
So David said he was a fundamental, what did you say you were? A fundamental optimist?
The opposite of you.
Thank you.
Not in everything, but in terms of pessimism and optimism.
Well, let me answer the question then. So if I'm the opposite of David and I'm a fundamental pessimist, which may be true, I would actually invest in Europe.
Good.
Because Europe is much better at dealing with shit than the United States.
So we agree. Okay.
And the world is so fucked up at the moment that if coherence is going to come from anywhere, it will come from a Europe that has been through many cycles of this crap, whereas America, for example, in the Middle East, America doesn't know how to deal with discord or failure, so it just retreats, whereas Europe may not always be as forward, as the old Churchill quote about it. It's the kind of the reverse of the old Churchill quote about America. But Europe may retreat, but eventually it will be forced into dealing with these issues. So I would buy European stock because Europe knows how to deal with bad situations.
So now imagine America, United States being a stock. Would you buy that, David?
Me? Definitely. Like I said, I'm an optimist. I do think we're at an odd low point with Trump clearly being the presidential candidate, and I don't think many of us in this room could think anything but negatively about that and oddly how it could have possibly come to that. I think there's a crisis in the United States of a disconnect between the elite and the general public, and we're the elite, and we don't understand. People on this island don't really have, including me, don't have a clue for the most part about what real America is going through, and I think we're being forced to recognize that right now, and it's a painful process of awareness and recognition, and it could result in Trump actually being president, and that is a scary fact, but I don't think that suggests the U.S. is on any kind of fundamental decline.
Andrew?
Oh, God. Well, you invest in America. Well, America is always very surprising, is, again, whenever you seem to write it off, it comes back. So America is remarkable. Again, this is a cliche, but I think it's true. America is remarkably vibrant and strong in economics. And it has a really profoundly dysfunctional political culture, which is getting worse. And so if I was to invest in American economic stock, I would. On the political front, no, and I think things are going to get a lot worse. Whether it's, in many ways, I see Hillary Clinton as the radical reverse of Trump. In her own way, she's just as bad. And they both reflect a profound dysfunctional nature of the political system.
Could I just jump in? I don't actually agree completely with that. I think Hillary is not putting herself forward as a sufficiently clear alternative to Trump, and it's very scary if she doesn't get out of her foxhole and start acting like a real human being. It could be a real problem. So that worries me, and I have something else, but I forgot.
Yeah, one other, Steve Case has just written a really good book called, I think it's The Third Wave or The Third Revolution. And he says now, in terms of our industry, we're in the political stage. And so whereas I think I answered the question incorrectly before by separating politics and economics. Actually, to have a vibrant economic system, you need a strong political system, which is why, again, if I was to invest in either Europe or America, it would be Europe, because Europe has a much more viable political system.
I remembered what I wanted to say. For any American here who didn't read it, the essay the other day by Mika Sifry about democracy in America is unbelievably disturbing to read. Mika, I think I pronounced his name right. He's a Civic Hall and Personal Democracy Forum. And basically he's arguing there is no real democracy in America, and our obsession on the presidential campaign is indicative of how disconnected we are from the way that the country really works, because it doesn't even really matter that much who's president. The Congress is non-democratic with gerrymandering and a whole bunch of other things. I mean, it's a very disturbing and extremely erudite perspective on just how screwed up American quote-unquote democracy has become.
Andrew, and you were a correspondent here in New York for almost 20 years. What's your view on that?
For me, it's almost a personal question, because for most of my adult life, I did heavily invest in America. I mean, I was living here. And
why did you actually leave?
I left because I really liked it. I mean, in culture and science, America is still like the place, the center of the world, and things are really positive and really strong, and things develop fast, and people think freely, and it's very invigorating. Then came a point where I actually sold my investment and I went back to Europe, and I'm still glad I did. And it becomes, I mean, in the past 10 years probably, and it's a development that started probably in 1980 with Reagan, like this, what you describe, it's almost like a schism between economics and politics that really tears this country apart, and has created a climate and a situation where you have old-fashioned monopolies tugging at this country and at this society that has not been heard of since the early 20th century.
What do you mean? What kind of monopoly?
You know, it's basically a stock market-driven economy that under the pretense of being like still the digital vision of the 90s, it's really a rampant market economy. And that has developed an energy and forces that politics seems to be unwilling or unable to like stand against. And then Europe does that. Europe is always ridiculed as being kind of like old-fashioned and Luddite and verklempt for like putting all these Brussels regulations on new technologies and new developments. But I think you mentioned just CRISPR. CRISPR is a point in science where I think it's one of the few times that scientists said, okay, let's stop progress right now. This is going at a speed and directions that we can control now. And you can use CRISPR as a metaphor, I think, for what's happening in America right now.
Could I just quickly, on the macro optimism point, though, we had a Techonomy Bio conference last year, and a genomicist from from Stanford, who's a really incredible, Drew Endy, pulled out a smartphone and said, by 2025, we're going to be able to grow this. And I totally think that kind of concept is not crazy, and that is the world we're heading into. And if you can't be optimistic about the set of potentialities that are emerging with genomics and biology and IT and cloud-based technology, and you're not looking at the reality. There is an enormous, wonderful world if we can just keep steering in the right direction.
Yeah, I'm particularly optimistic about re-engineering species.
Okay, that's facetious, but wasn't it?
It's funny, I think, actually.
Well, I think we will re-engineer species. We'll also re-engineer the planet. I think geoengineering is inevitable, and I don't think that's necessarily so terrible either. I mean, science is capable of some miraculous feats, and we're going to have to lean on it,
But Andrew, are humans that bad that only artificial intelligence can guarantee the survival of our species?
Bad or stupid?
What do you think?
Well, I think it's borrowing David's word, a facetious question about an important subject. I think the great challenge for all of us in this sort of engineering this brave new world of technology is that we've marginalized ourselves as human beings. We're scratching our head about what are we going to do in this world? Some of us will always be okay. There'll always be a need for commentators and entrepreneurs and investors, but we are writing most of our species out of the narrative now. So the great question when it comes to artificial intelligence is, what do we do? And that's not a utilitarian question. It's not a question of sort of getting jobs. The question, I think, that's going to increasingly face us as we move forward in this new world is, what does it mean to be human? And what can we do that smart machines can't do? That's the question that I think entrepreneurs, investors, and all of us need to figure out. Because if we don't, then we're going to look really stupid.
What's your answer to that question?
Well, I'm writing a book called How to Fix the Future, so I'm not going to tell you now, but it'll be out next year.
Andrea?
I think one danger about artificial intelligence that we overestimated. I think it will be great in certain tasks, and there might be a better artificial intelligence driver for a car in the not so far future. But in general, AI will still be like a very focused, pinpoint technology that will not have this overarching. I mean, there's some almost like biological views of technology, and some like theological, like the theological part would be the singularity moment, which always reminds me of like Baptist preachers talking about the Great Awakening. I mean, there is not going to be a Great Awakening of machines. I mean, there's some, like George Dyson, the science historian, said, like, basically singularity already happened. I mean, we're already past that point since the 70s or 80s, and that science fiction type of singularity, that will basically never happen. On the other hand, you have people like Kevin Kelly with Technium that say, well, technology evolves like a biological organism, and it will just evolve, and it is not much we can do. We can like guide it along, but basically it's its own organism. And I don't think so, because I mean, we are still the creators of technology, and so we can very well guide it in any direction we want to, unless there's one organism that is seemingly uncontrollable, which is the market, unless the market takes into directions where we'll just let it go rampant.
David, do we overestimate artificial intelligence? Do you agree?
No, I don't think that's what either of these guys are saying. I agree with both of what they said, and I think the influence of Ray Kurzweil has been, philosophically, has been negative. It's been a little negative, the idea, Kurzweil's having so much influence on this singularity idea, because I think it is sort of dumb, to be honest. But I completely agree with what Andrew said, and when I heard David Kenny and I forget his name, but the German AI guy that spoke before him, they were both fantastic, and they both basically said what these two guys are saying, that the only potential of AI really is in partnership with humans, and that's what it will help us do. And I think everyone who's really looking closely at the future of AI right now, maybe except for Ray Kurzweil, is basically accepting that the key challenge is going to be, how do we understand the machines well enough to work closely with them? And, again, in the United States, we're so educationally impaired that it's a real problem to imagine the world that we'll have to get to be able to do that. I think in places like Europe, where generally education is valued more highly than it is here, you may have a slightly easier time. I mean, we really have an egregiously ignorant country here. And you're going to have to know something about what's what to work with machines, but I think it's a great possibility that it'll work out fine.
David, have you ever been to England? I mean, they're not that smart either.
Well, you would know better than me. I don't know. I just think we just don't really understand. We have a very ignorant public in this country. We've disregarded education for my entire life, and I'm in my 60s, you know. We have not taken education seriously as a nation, and it's disastrous. And it's going to pay negative dividends.
I don't think
now I'm sounding pessimistic about America.
We'll get you back on course. I think it's not enough to understand AI, and even like it's important that the general public understands it. I do think I agree with the Future of Life Institute in Cambridge and the work of Nick Bostrom in Oxford, and also what Elon Musk is financing. I think they see it very clearly that we are at a point in AI where we have to now really inject it with values and safeguards, because the danger is not the great AI that becomes the big entities sending out Terminators to suppress us and enslave us. The real danger is a very competent, potent AI that goes rampant out of an inherent machine stupidity. And we're at the technological moment where we can actually still put in safeguards.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I'm not in the Bostrom camp. Some of my research for my book is at the Cambridge Center for Existential Risk, and I think it's a very interesting area. I'm not in the Kurzweil camp. I think that is science fictional, but we are confronted with a fundamental issue of we're inventing machines that will, for the most part, replicate what we can do in terms of our work. Martin Ford's book, the robot book, won the Financial Times Book of the Year award, and this is imminent. I mean, billions of dollars are going into AI. These bots are going to replace more and more skilled and unskilled laborers. So I would say that this is a reality in the next 5 to 10 years.
David, what's your last question to everybody of you? What's your takeaway of the last 2 days? What has been your DLD moment Tuesday or today?
Oh, you've had a lot of good sessions, and I really
You're not fishing
learned
for
a lot.
compliments.
No, but the sad reality is the session you moderated and the guy beforehand talking about the risks of all of us being on the web,
the browser,
and being so ignorant about what's really happening in our browsers and with our information was very eye-opening to me. It was one of several.
Yeah, it's the same one. The Mark Alhames, I don't know if he's here, but he
was good.
He was absolutely brilliant. But what he brought up was something that's really important that comes back to the Europe versus America thing. He brought up the analogy of the car industry. He said in the 50s, the American car industry was dominant. They had these spectacularly sexy cars, but they were profoundly unsafe. Ralph Nader has written a book about this. And what you saw in the 50s was the collapse of the American car industry and the rise of the German industry that focused on the consumer, focused on the end user, and we know the end of the story. It's a remarkable resurgence or foundation of German industrial might based on its car industry. 20 or 30% of the people who work in Germany are somehow associated with the car industry. 20%. And what Marx stressed, and this is really important in terms of, we can joke about it, Americans and Europeans and all the rest of it, but what's really important that Marx stressed is that the American internet industry is based on a fundamental problem. The fundamental problem is that the free economy exploits its users. It takes advantages of its users. And unless America gets that right, unless Silicon Valley gets that right, and it's going to require new companies, Google and Facebook aren't going to be able to do this. Unless they get that right, the fate of the American technology industry, which many of us, certainly Americans, take for granted, will be like the car industry. In the end, it's going to go somewhere else, maybe Germany, maybe China. But at the moment, I think Mark's speech was so brilliant. He reminded us that nothing lasts forever. And if you take advantage of your user, if you destroy trust, then in the long run, your dominance will end.
This is, as Andrew knows, this is an area where I very much disagree with him, even though I think it's legitimate to question the behavior.
I'm just quoting Mark. I wasn't giving my opinion.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's absolutely right and necessary and legitimate to push back on Google and Facebook on many, and Amazon for that, and Apple, on many, many matters. And I don't take them at face value, but I think anyone in this room, if you were to withdraw Facebook and Google from their lives, 90% at least of the people in this room would be bereft. And you have to accept that these services have transformed billions of lives for the better. And I think the nature of the relationship between advertising and behavior is one that's evolving and has to be viewed with a lot of caution. But to look at it as fundamentally like an evil empire mindset coming out of those companies is just...
But no one said that. Mark didn't say that. Just use the example of the car industry.
You sort of think
Andrew,
that.
what's your takeaway?
I had a very pessimistic moment and a great optimistic experience. I'm going to start with the pessimistic moment. The pessimistic moment was just like before I came on stage here. It was the CRISPR workshop that Alan Jorgensen gave down there. And even though I probably only understood half of it, it made me kind of buy a homestead in Antarctica. It seems that now genetic engineering is as easily done by laymen as is HTML writing for the web. But if you make a mistake in HTML, your website crashes. If you make a mistake in CRISPR, as I understand it, your species crashes. And there's a fundamental difference in that. So that was a really scary moment, and I'm not so sure if I see the bright side and the silver lining in this technology.
Remember Bill Joy's famous Wired article? He was worried about that.
But you mentioned also...
16 years ago.
Right. But the great overall optimistic experience is not just for this, but especially this was my first New York DLD, which was really a great experience. But I've been to the original DLD in Munich for many, many years. So the great optimistic experience of these conferences is always that you do have a new, incredibly powerful industry of science and technology. But I think the depth of thought that at conferences like this is celebrated or performed or whatever you want to call it, the depth of thought is pretty unique. And I don't think that the car industry in the early 20th century had like conferences like this where they really thought about the impact that technology will have.
Can I add one ass-kissing comment that's good for ending? Because honestly, one of the things that's so great about DLD in Germany, because so many Americans come there, and in New York, because so many Europeans come here, is it really is the only place I know where these discussions are happening at scale with a truly diverse global audience. And it really does bring different perspectives to bear, which is enormously healthy and necessary because these are global questions.
Thanks to you, thanks to all the other speakers, thanks to the audience, and thanks to the team. We would like to ask them all on stage. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. This was DLD 2016. Come on stage. Thank you.